Now, Robin, you were back on the show we mentioned earlier in 2022, and you talked about how the legal industry was more willing to discuss wellness issues, particularly after the pandemic. Have you seen that trend continue now that we've sort of turned the corner, you might say, on the pandemic, or is it
I
not so
do.
much in the forefront? Okay, you
No,
do.
I do. I see, I go to bar meetings, across the country. I just came back from the Maine State Bar Convention where they were spotlighting and highlighting well-being. The president, Jonathan Dunitz, decided 4 years ago he was going to make well-being his platform. But I've seen this beyond the Maine State Bar. Other bars are really seizing on this because they know that their members are hungry for information and really want to start to take care of themselves better. I think there's been a lot of education by bar associations around this issue. I know at the National Conference of Bar Presidents, every meeting we're focused on well-being in one form or another, some sort of program. And bars see it as like something that it's for everybody. So it's not just an issue where maybe you're struggling with some, mental health or chemical dependency issue or something. It's or anxiety. It's for everybody.
Yeah.
Even if you're functioning and you think you're doing just fine, how do you achieve peak performance? Well, that's just another way of talking about flourishing. So it's for everybody. And I do think that bars view it as just something where everyone can agree. In an era where we have so much divisiveness about so many issues in the law, this is an issue where we all come together about, preserving and promoting the flourishing of our profession.
Right. And I'm just curious, and Joan, I'll ask you this. You guys have been working in this area for a long time. Would you say, though, that the pandemic was the catalyst kind of for this conversation to start about well-being when it comes to lawyers? Because well-being and work-related issues have always been at the forefront, mental health issues, but people just weren't willing to talk about it. So, Joan, would you say that was the catalyst to really get it out into the mainstream?
I think that these conversations were happening. I think that the pandemic meant that we had to go over here and do this for a while and figure these kinds of things out. There's a writer, Dr. Ann Maston, who talks about surge capacity. And this is where what we have to do is something happens and we have to all hands on deck and figure out how to do things. And organizations and offices that said we will never be remote all of a sudden had to be. And so people figured out how to do things, but they had to do that for a while. And well-being was one of the things that I think was sort of skating along on the ice with all of these things, where how are people doing with this? Because the conversations had begun, there could be more conversations about, well, how do we support people? How do we make sure that people who come from different places can be able to function and even thrive in this? And yes, we're doing all we can. And yes, we know there's a lot we can't do. And then I think there's also an increased attention to neurodiversity. And I think we've seen that within national and regional and state bar associations, where that's something that's being attended to. And that means that we think differently. And you can take those principles and apply them to, so how do we support people in being able to do their best work, which really is well-being. And then combined with that, then what we had, I think, is as we start to come out of it, we say, well, what's it going to be like now? We have a chance to do some things. And so we couldn't keep surging. You can't keep doing that. But what you can do is say, what now? What have we learned? What can we do with this? And I think there was a much greater willingness to say, okay, let's talk about how you do your best work, because it's about best returns on investment. It's about how people are doing, are feeling the most belonging in an organization. And it's also very much a diversity, equity, and inclusion issue, including neurodiversity, but so many other areas. And so I think it kind of, it's almost like it was boosted in a way as something that's important. And yet I believe those conversations had started.